Verse 8 to 14. She shows in one word what it was that brought all this misery upon them. They chose new gods. v8. It was their idolatry that provoked God to give them up thus into the hands of their enemies. The Lord their God was one Lord, but this would not content them, they must have more, many more, still more. Their God was the Ancient of Days, still the same, and therefore they grew weary of him, and must have new gods, which they were as fond of as children of new clothes, names newly invented, heroes newly canonized. Their fathers, when put to their choice, chose the Lord for their God, Jos 24:21, but they would not abide by that choice, they must have gods of their own choosing. She takes notice of God's great goodness to Israel in raising up such as should redress these grievances. Herself first, v7 till that I Deborah arose to restrain and punish those who disturbed the public peace, and protect men in their business, and then the face of things was changed for the better quickly, those beasts of prey retired upon the breaking forth of this joyful light, and man went forth again to his work and labor. Thus she became a mother in Israel, a nursing mother, such was the affection she bore to her people, and such the care and pains she took for the public welfare. Under her there were other governors of Israel, v9, who, like her, had done their part as governors to reform the people, and then, like her, offered themselves willingly to serve in the war, not insisting upon the exemption which their dignity and office entitled them to, when they had so fair an opportunity of appearing in their country's cause, and no doubt the example of the governors influenced the people in like manner willingly to offer themselves. v2. Of these governors she says, my heart is towards them, that is, I truly love and honor them, they have won my heart forever, I shall never forget them. Note, those are worthy of double honor that recede voluntarily from the demands of their honor to serve God and His Church. She calls upon those who had a particular share in the advantages of this great salvation to offer up particular thanks to God for it. Let every man speak as he found of the goodness of God in this happy change of the posture of public affairs. You that ride on white asses, that is, the nobility and gentry. Horses were little used in that county, they had, it is probable, a much better breed of asses than we have, but persons of quality, it seems, were distinguished by the color of the asses they rode on, the white being more rare were therefore more valued. Notice is taken of Abdon's sons and grandsons riding on ass colts, as indicating them to be men of distinction. Let such as are by this salvation restored, not only to their liberty as other Israelites, but to their dignity, speak God's praises. Let those that sit in judgment be sensible of it, and thankful for it as a very great mercy, that they may sit safely there, that the sword of justice is not struck out of their hand by the sword of war. Let those that walk by the way, and meet with none there to make them afraid, speak to themselves in pious meditations, and to their fellow travelers in religious discourses, of the goodness of God in ridding the roads of those banditti that had so long infested them. Let those that draw in peace, and have not their wells taken from them, or stopped up, nor are in danger of being caught by the enemy when they go forth to draw, there, where they find themselves so much more safe and easy than they have been, there let them rehearse the acts of the Lord, not Deborah's acts, nor Barak's, but the Lord's, taking notice of his hand making peace in their borders, and creating a defense upon all the glory. This is the Lord's doing. Observe in these acts of his justice executed on his daring enemies. They are the righteous acts of the Lord. See him pleading a righteous cause, and sitting in the throne judging aright, and give him glory as the judge of all the earth. Kindness shown to his trembling people, the inhabitants of the villages, who lay most open to the enemy, had suffered most, and were most in danger. It is the glory of God to protect those that are most exposed, and to help the weakest. Let us all take notice of the share we in particular have in the public peace and tranquility, the inhabitants of the villages especially, and give God the praise of it. Here, Deborah stirs up herself and Barak to celebrate this victory in the most solemn manner, to the glory of God and the honor of Israel, for the encouragement of their friends and the greater confusion of their enemies. Deborah, as a prophetess, must do it by a song, to compose and sing which she excites herself, awake, awake, and again, "Awake, awake," which intimates the sense she had of the excellency and difficulty of the work. It needed and well deserved the utmost liveliness and vigor of soul in the performance of it. All the powers and faculties of the soul in their closest intensity and application ought to be employed in it. Thus too she expresses the sense she had of her own infirmity, an aptness to flag and remit in her zeal in this work. Note, praising God is work that we should awake to, and awake ourselves to. Baruch, as a general, must do it by a triumph, lead thy captivity captive. Though the army of Sisera was cut off in the field, and no quarter given, yet we may suppose in the prosecution of the victory, when the war was carried into the enemy's country, many not found in arms were seized and made prisoners of war. These she would have led in chains after Baruch, when he made his public entry into his own city, to grace his triumphs, not as if it should be any pleasure to him to trample upon his fellow creatures, but thus he must give glory to God, and serve that great purpose of his government which is to look upon those that are proud and to abase them. She gives good reason for this praise and triumph, v. 13. This glorious victory had made the remnant of Israel, and Deborah in particular, look very great, a circumstance which they owed entirely to God. The Israelites had become few and inconsiderable, and yet to them God gave dominion over nobles. Many of them were cut off by the enemy, many died of grief, and perhaps some had removed their families and effects into foreign parts, yet those few that remained, by divine assistance, with one brave and generous effort, not only shook off the yoke of oppression from their own neck, but got power over their oppressors. As long as any of God's Israel remain, and a remnant God will have in the worst of times, there is hope, be it ever so small a remnant, for God can make him that remains, though it should be but one single person, triumph over the most proud and potent. Deborah was herself of the weaker sex, and the sex that from the fall had been sentenced to subjection, and yet the Lord that is himself higher than the highest authorized her to rule over the mighty men of Israel, who willingly submitted to her direction, and enabled her to triumph over the mighty men of Canaan, who fell before the army she commanded, so wonderfully did he advance the low estate of his handmaid. The Lord made me, a woman, to have dominion over mighty men. A despised stone is made head of the corner. This is indeed the Lord's doing, and marvelous in our eyes. She makes particular remarks on the several parties concerned in this great action, taking notice who fought against them, who fought for them, and who stood neuter. Who fought against them? The power of the enemy must be taken notice of, that the victory may appear the more glorious. Jabin and Sisera had been mentioned in the history, but here it appears further, that Amalek was in league with Jabin, and sent him in assistance, or endeavored to do it. Ephraim is here said to act against Amalek, v. 14, probably intercepting and cutting off some forces of the Amalekites that were upon their march to join Sisera. Amalek had helped Moab to oppress Israel, ch. 3:13, and now had helped Jabin. They were inveterate enemies to God's people. Their hand had always been against the throne of the Lord, ex 17:16, and therefore they were the more dangerous. That others of the kings of Canaan, who had somewhat recovered themselves since their defeat by Joshua, joined with Jabin, and strengthened his army with their forces, having the same implacable enmity to Israel that he had, and those kingdoms, when they were in their strength, having been subject to that of Hazor. These kings came and fought, v. 19. Israel had no king, their enemies had many, whose power and influence, especially acting in confederacy, made them very formidable, and yet Israel, having the Lord for their king, was too hard for them all. It is said of these kings that they took no gain of money, they were not mercenary troops hired into the service of Jabin, such often fail in an extremity, but they were volunteers and hardy in the cause against Israel. They desired not the riches of silver, so the Chaldee, but only the satisfaction of helping to ruin Israel. Acting upon this principle, they were the more formidable, and would be the more cruel.